Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. Welcome to the wild roller coaster ride, otherwise known as the Elder Scrolls Online PTS patch notes. We didn't get a ton of changes for week 4, but the ones that did come through are pretty big, so let's go ahead and jump into them. We'll start with the Dragonite changes. Burning Embers reduced the healing value from this morph to up to 50%, down from up to 100%. Right now, the healing values from this ability are enabling the Dragonite too much staying power. While we want to retain the ability to reward the caster for going in and dotting up their foes, the raw damage and healing from this ability is simply too much in its current form. So this was obviously changed for PvP reasons. For PvE, it's obviously still a nerf, but damage dealers often ran the other morph, Venomous Claw here, so should still give a fair amount of healing in PvE if you are going with this morph, even down to 50% instead of the 100% of the damage done. However, for PvP after Battle Spirit is factored in, I imagine this cuts the heal down quite a bit to a fairly small incoming heal over time. The next change is to Coagulating Blood. This morph no longer reduces in cost, but instead increases the healing bonus based on your missing health to 50%, up from 33%. The healing bonus is now a true value rather than an additive value. Reduce the base healing of the skill by approximately 3% to fix some calculation errors. So the developer comment says, this skill is currently enabling the Dragonite to bounce back from near-death situations a little too frequently, where its significant cost reduction compared to other burst heals of its nature is allowing it to be cast with reckless abandon. By taking away the cost reduction bonus on the morph, we needed to find another morph empowerment to ensure the skill felt like it was gaining something rather than changing something. As the skill is meant to bring you back from death's door, we wanted to reinforce this with the execute scaling increase, but hopefully we see the frequency of returning from the brink a little less frequently. So pretty much this is going to be a little stronger than it was, but it will also be really expensive. So for the majority of setups, you simply won't have the resources to keep spamming it constantly to stay alive, especially when paired with the following change. So this next one is, well, let's just get into it. Combustion. This passive now has a cooldown of 3 seconds, up from 0.5 seconds. So for those that don't know what this passive is, it is the one that increases the damage of your burning and poison status effects by 50%. And then when you apply burning to an enemy, you restore 1000 magicka. When you apply poison to an enemy, you restore 1000 stamina. So now these effects can only occur once every 3 seconds each, rather than every half second each. This will likely end up one of the heaviest sustain nerfs that we've ever seen ZOS do with a single change, but one misconception that I have been seeing is that it is an 83% nerf, and that is treating it like you got the combustion proc every half second, and now you'll get it every 3 seconds. So this would mean that you have twice as many burning ticks as seconds that you were in combat. If anyone can send me a log or CMX report where that is actually the case, I'll be very shocked. For AoE heavy situations, I've definitely seen where the number of burning ticks exceeds the number of seconds in combat, even by quite a few, but not double the number of seconds in combat. So while it is a heavy nerf, I'm not saying that it's not. Comparing it as though it was actually triggering every half second is a little disingenuous as well. So like the Burning Embers change, it seems that this was also done probably mostly for PvP reasons, and I'll fully admit the original half second cooldown with 1000 return was overpowered, but man, they hit it so hard. DKs have lots of really expensive magicka skills to keep up, so this change is going to be felt pretty deeply. So let's take a look at what they had to say in the developer comment, and then I'll give a little more feedback on the change. This passive is enabling a lot of sustain in situations where you're building around it with status chance increases, allowing the Dragonite to sustain effortlessly with a few passive options. The class was originally meant to struggle a little more with sustain. Okay, that's news to me. With larger moments of burst with Battle Roar and Combustion procs peppered in. While we love the synergy here with some more niche gameplay elements like charged and focusing on status effects, okay, real quick, I definitely wouldn't say this is niche. This is far and away the most common trait to run on an offhand for DPS right now, for all classes, but especially on Dragonites. And offhand DKs have been going double charged even. It's absolutely the meta right now, and not really niche at all. They recently in the Deadlands buffed the hell out of charged, so yeah, people are running it. In the same patch, they also upped combustion to 1000 instead of 500, so yeah, those two things together are probably the reason it is so strong right now. now. Anyways, back to their comment. They said this passive was removing one of the core weaknesses of the class that kept it in check in many areas. As such, we're increasing the cooldown in hopes to bring back some of the natural difficulty the class has with keeping the pedal to the metal, while still being more viable than it was when its flames were more like embers. All right, let's break this down here. I think I get what they're saying. It seems like they want Dragon Knights to be the really hard-hitting big dudes that get winded really quickly, but no matter the reasoning, bad sustain just doesn't feel good and it takes away a lot of the fun. Do I think that combustion was overperforming? Absolutely, and it was directly caused by their buffs in the Deadlands to both that and to charged. But now this is going to create some pretty big sustain issues for a lot of setups, as many of the class skill costs are really high, and this was kind of the main way that we offset that. I don't see why ZOS always wants to swing changes so far in one direction or the other rather than making smaller tweaks, and then if those aren't enough, tweak them a little more. Sustain was stupidly good on DKs because of the plethora of wild changes they introduced all at once in the Deadlands, then add on the splitting up of the skills with the hybridization stuff in Ascending Tide, and yeah, overall it got to a pretty nutty spot. But now, instead of trying to tweak the problem until it's in a good spot, we're getting another heavy-handed adjustment. Now, this isn't the end of the road for DKs. The reason this video is coming out a little bit later than some of the other patch notes videos is because I wanted to actually sit down with this information for a bit, do some testing, and try and avoid overreacting to the changes until I had a chance to wrap my head around them a little bit better. So I did a few DPS tests comparing to similar setups from the current live patch. Keeping everything the same, sustain was really tight, but I was able to make it all the way through the parse without running out of magicka. So keep in mind this was with a two-handed back bar though. I have 4 stamina skills: Barbed Trap, Venomous Claw, Stampede, and Carve. And I wouldn't put too much attention on the total DPS levels here. These were just a couple of quick parses I did and had some awful crit luck, and it really wasn't the point of what I was trying to take a look at here. I was just trying to see overall where the sustain was lining up now compared to where it used to be. Another thing I did try out as well is swapping Engulfing Flames over to Noxious Breath. This actually worked really well to help with sustain, and I had no magicka issues at all going this route. Now obviously this won't be doable if you are the sole provider of Engulfing Flames for your group, but if you aren't relied on for it, you do have that flexibility here if you need some sustain help. So I think overall, if you are split up pretty well and you're going more of that hybrid kind of route, you should still be all right for sustain on DKs. But one of the big issues now is that you are kind of forced to go that route if you want to even hope for a semblance of sustain. Going a more traditional all stam or all mag route is going to be out of the question really for PvE DPS for any encounters that aren't super quick. You'll just run out of juice way too fast. And that doesn't even begin to consider skills like Burning Talons and Deep Breath. These are really strong AoE skills that have very high costs to them. One thing that made DKs so powerful was being able to use either Talons or both Talons and Deep Breath together over a longer encounter and dish out really crazy high levels of AoE damage. Combustion was one of the main things that allowed this to be possible. And I think for short burst trash encounters, probably will still be fine to use these, but I don't see any way that DKs will be able to sustain these for longer boss encounters now, especially when they are already probably struggling a tad bit even without these slotted. So even swapping, let's say from buy-stat food to recovery food, that isn't going to even come close to making up the difference in sustain from combustion only triggering 3 seconds now. Now, you can say DKs should have never been able to spam these expensive skills the way they did, and I think that is what ZOS is trying to say too maybe, and I don't completely disagree, but that is a big part of what was making DKs feel so fun to play was their unique AoE options that made it feel like you were just burning everything to the ground. The next big issue I see this causing is with stamina Dragon Knights and being able to use Whip as their spammable. Whip is not super expensive, but when you are stacking into stamina, you don't have a whole lot of magicka to work with, especially when a lot of your other abilities in your class kit are going to cost magicka as well. The charge trait paired with combustion created a unique situation where stamina DKs had the option of using Whip. And before you say, well, other stamina classes don't have an easy time sustaining their magicka-based spammables. Well, yes, that is true, but remember Whip was introduced as hybrid before the big hybrid pass to all of the skills. Lava Whip. This ability and its morphs now scale off your highest offensive stats rather than exclusively magicka-based stats. May this finally end the fiery and age-old debate over getting a stamina whip, as this is our version of it. Well, I guess the fiery and age-old debate is back on. I mean, right there, they pretty much are saying they made it with the intention of Stamina Dragonites being able to use it. And they could. You just needed to have charge going, and the combustion passive made it possible. So I'd like to know if they have turned their back on that idea. Do they want Stam DKs to instead be pushed into going with Stone Giant now, rather than having the option of either or? There hasn't been any commentary about them no longer supporting this as a viable option for Stamina Dragonites, but there won't be a way to sustain this now as a main spammable option if you aren't stacking into Magicka. That's probably the most disappointing part of all of this to me personally. I thought it was a really cool and unique way to play a stamina class. I've been having a lot more fun on my Stam DK this patch than I had for years, and this is going to change a lot of what I've been doing up, and yeah, it just kind of sucks overall. So I'd love to see this tweaked. I've already conceded that it was too strong, but changing the cooldown to 3 seconds just seems way too harsh if no other changes are made. If they aren't going to budge on that aspect, then I think Talons and Deep Breath should come down a little in cost. I mean, Deep Breath essentially works in a very similar way to Blast Bones, but is way more expensive and does less damage. It does have a heal tied to it, so maybe it would be cool to have a version that deals damage, interrupts, and heals, but is more expensive, and then a cheaper morph that just deals damage only but is hard hitting like Deep Breath is right now. And then for Whip, I think it needs something to let Stamina Dragonites still use it. Maybe it could cost Magicka or Stamina, whichever resource is higher. Maybe it could cost half Stamina and half Magicka to split it evenly for both sides. Or if they don't want Stam DKs to use it anymore, I'd like to hear about why they changed their minds on that, and if there are any plans to update Stone Giant at all to make it feel a bit less clunky. But that's the end of my rant on this. I wish some of the stuff could be adjusted without these sledgehammer changes, and honestly, I'm not really surprised because that's kind of what we are used to by now, but this is my feedback on it. I'm really worried that the magic that they've put into Dragonite DPS since the Deadlands is going to fade out a little, and they aren't going to feel nearly as fun to play in the coming patches, but hopefully I'm wrong, or we can get some further tweaks to make it feel a little bit better. All right, let's move on to the item set changes. First, we have Mora's Whispers. Increase the bonus XP granted from monster kills to 15%, up from 10%, to try and help increase the payout of this set for all you based Magus skilled grinders out there. So the other stats on this one are all the same, they just increase the monster skill XP. All right, next up is a pretty big one, Oakensoul. This set no longer grants 37 health, magicka, and stamina. Replace the major endurance, fortitude, and intellect with their minor buff counterparts, as these are far harder to obtain. So the majors that they previously offered here were the same buffs that you get from just drinking a potion, so now they've gone with the minors instead, which are actually a lot more useful to have. And then on top of what it previously had, the set now also grants major brutality, major sorcery, major berserk, major protection, major force, and major heroism. Developer comment, we're doubling down on the identity of this mythic, where it's meant to be an alternative to running many abilities that would naturally grant you a ton of power in form of duration-based bonuses. Our hope is that the access to a ton of major and minor buffs really helps this mythic stamp itself down as an accessibility option to players who don't have access to sweaty buff up times, group compositions, and high APM. The removal of unique stats takes away any situation where this mythic felt like a straight upgrade to others and carves a unique spot that is more niche than what was previously seen, but still stands its ground with granting you access to a lot of raw power. And yeah, this thing is absolutely loaded now, and I agree for the most part with what they're saying there. Well, let's just go through what all it has, and I'll give some feedback on the current state of it. So, minor intellect, endurance, and fortitude, which is a 15% boost to each of your recoveries. So one of my big complaints about this set last week was it had the major versions of these boosts, which pretty much everyone always gets with potions anyways. And then these minors have fewer common sources, so it could be a bit redundant at times, as some groups will run the skills that give these to everybody, but most groups probably won't have perfect uptimes on these buffs, so it still has some value even in group play. Next up, they added in major sorcery and brutality, which is the 20% boost to your weapon and spell damage, and I think this is pretty fitting since you often just use potions or a skill on your back bar to proc this, so it fits in with the theme to have it added in. And then the major prophecy and savagery, the 12% boost to your critical chance, are kind of in the same boat there, often obtained through potions or having a skill like inner light or camo hunter slotted, so now you have a little bit more bar space to not have to worry about these. Next up, we have major protection. This is 10% damage mitigation. So same premise here. We usually see this with revealing flare slotted on your bar as probably the most common source for this. Damage dealers often won't have room to slot it, but it is pretty common to see tanks running that skill on their bars. So this is just another buff that you don't have to make room for on your bars to slot. And then we have Major Resolve, which is the 5948 armor buff. Every class has access to this pretty easy, or the whole group with Frost Cloak. So again, just frees up some bar space to not slot a skill for it, or helps out with situations where you might not have great uptimes on the Frost Cloak. And then next we have Major Courage. This is 430 weapon and spell damage. This is one of the more common buffs we see in group play and is pretty easy to keep up near 100% with spell power cure. So probably a bit redundant in groups with the support running it, but could be nice for pugs and definitely nice for solo stuff. Next is Major Berserk. This is a 10% damage done buff. Most commonly we see this one on damage dealers through the Kenra's Wrath set. So that's kind of nice. We can get this buff and run a different set other than Kenra's Wrath and not have to worry about maintaining the stacks from our light attacks to keep it up. And then next we have Major Heroism. This is 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds. This is the first buff out of all these I've listed here that I'm not sure I'm a fan of. And the reason being is it isn't really a common buff to get, whereas all of the others are. Drake's Rush can give it to the group, but it's limited to a 4-person group, and in 4-person groups you are pretty limited with which sets you have room to run. So I don't know if this one fits in well with the overall theme. It is exciting for sure. You could run the minor heroism potions with this and get ultimate back at a really insane rate, but I'm just worried it's a little too much, and there might actually be scenarios where this could be a meta type of strategy for someone to run this paired with something that synergizes really well with ultimates, and I think that kind of oversteps the boundaries of the original premise of the set. I do think minor heroism would probably be fine here. You wouldn't have to run the expensive potions to get it, and you could just benefit from that while using cheaper potions, and it wouldn't be this crazy combo of getting major and minor heroism both together. And then finally we have Major Force, a 20% crit damage buff. This one I don't hate as much as Major Heroism, but I think it might be a tad too much. I think Minor Force would probably be more reasonable here than Major. I think it fits overall with the theme of the ring a little bit better, as with Major Force you'd still need to slot Trap or Channeled Acceleration or use a set that has Minor Force on it. So if this was Minor Force, that would again free you up to have one less thing to worry about. But overall, I think the set bonuses are in an okay spot, except maybe those last two there. I think changing those over to Minor Heroism and Minor Force would still be really nice overall. Those are still really appealing buffs, but would fit in with the idea of what the ring is supposed to be doing a little bit better. My only other real complaint is with all of these buffs on it, it's kind of a no-brainer for solo content. For group content, there is a lot of overlap. I don't think it really overperforms given that you are stuck on one bar, but for solo, wow, so many boosts here that you wouldn't normally be getting, and I wouldn't be shocked if it's actually stronger than using 2 bars for solo play in some scenarios, but we'll see where it ends up. Keeping up with this mythic has been quite the roller coaster ride so far. I think overall it is in a better place than the previous 2 iterations though. Week 1 was a little bit too strong, week 3 was a little too weak, so this feels like a better middle ground overall. Maybe just a couple more small tweaks and it could be really great for accessibility still, but not overpowered to where people feel like they might get better results with it in some scenarios going 1 bar over 2. Then the final change we'll go over is to Pillager's Prophet. Casting an ultimate ability while in combat grants 5% of ultimate spent as ultimate up to a max of 20 to up to 11 group members within 12 meters every 2 seconds over 10 seconds. Group members can only be affected by this set every 45 seconds. The developer comment says this set has been updated to shift away from granting a huge spike in immediate power to capping it and feeding it over time to the group. With this change, the most a player will be able to gain is 100 ultimate total, and the overtime will allow some of the bonus to feed into your next ultimate if you cast while the buff is active. So a little more forgiving if you cast your ult right after the person wearing this casts their ult. Before, all that ult would just be wasted, but now if you catch it in time and it's not too far, you'll still get some of that ult back. So with this, we hope to make the set more beneficial outside of highly coordinated groups that can line up all their ultimates in a short window, as well as reducing the burst potential of this set in those situations. So pretty much they nuked this as a burst ult set where you could drop an ult and then pretty much immediately drop another one if someone on your team casts their ult with this set on. I think it still gives a pretty good amount of ult back though. Let's say you cast your Warhorn right at 250 ult, you'll still be giving your team close to 65 ult back over 10 seconds, which isn't awful. It's just not quite as crazy as it was. And as they mentioned, you can get up to 100 ult back over 10 seconds if you're casting this with 400 ult or more. So still seems like it can be situationally strong, just not quite at the level that it was for weeks 2 and 3. I would like to see this maybe apply to the wearer now also, since it comes back spread out over 10 seconds. As a burst, I can understand why they didn't want it to be a thing, but with it coming back more spread out, I think it'd be pretty cool to have the wearer also benefit and get their ults back up a little bit more quickly. I don't think this would be overpowered because you still have that 45-second cooldown, so it isn't like you could just spam the set, but it would make those ults you cast have a little more juice behind them when you do. But that's going to do it for this week's patch note review. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the changes. How are you liking the current version of Oakensoul? And do you think the DK nerf was too much or was it in a fair spot? I want to give a big thanks to my current Patreon supporters and YouTube members. There are ways to help support the channel and keep these guides coming for as little as $3. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougars Bay and the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, BlakeWin816, Mordecai1212, Santanico, Nolandia, and my wonderful wife. Thanks again everyone for stopping by. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.